you have a water bottle that you carry with you everywhere. Would you like to cover it in knitting? Then this video is for you. This is a knit project, and the instructions on how to complete a knit cover for your water bottle. For today's project, start with the water bottle you wish to cover. Have that on hand. You will need it to measure against. Now, of course, this is a knitting project, so you will need yarn. In this case, I am using number 3 crochet cotton, something of a similar weight. You can go lighter, you can go a little bit heavier, whatever you prefer. I like this weight for this project. Then knitting needles of the size that is recommended for that yarn. These are size 3. I'm using double pointed needles. A comparable crochet hook of the same size. Then of course the usual knitting stuff. You'll need tapestry needle, scissors, markers, tape measure. You will also need elastic, enough to go around the water bottle. So this is way more than I'm going to need. And then for the elastic, you will need a thread and a needle. And finally, you will need a stitch pattern. I am using the English Mesh Lace, which is in Barbara Walker's First Treasury Stitch Dictionary. If you want to use that, but whatever stitch pattern you prefer will work just fine. Step 1 of the project is to swatch. I cast on a bunch of stitches, multiple 6 in this case, worked a couple rows of garter stitch, and then just worked my stitch pattern that I'm going to be using for a couple of repeats. I do this for a couple of reasons: to get the stitch pattern under my needles, under my fingers, to make sure I know what I'm doing, and of course to make the measurements. This is critical. So make sure you start with whatever stitch pattern you want to use and make a swatch. And now I'm going to measure. So from here to here, that is about, we'll call that 3.5 inches. And I've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 stitches. Now I want to measure my water bottle. So I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to measure all the way around. And that is about 9.5 inches. Okay, now that I have my swatch done and I have my measurements taken, it's time for a bit of math. I start with my swatch was 18 stitches over about 3.5 inches, a little bit under 3.5 inches, but close enough. This is knitting, so we can fudge the numbers a little bit. Then the water bottle had a 9.5 inch circumference, a little bit more, but my tape measure, close enough. So I just take those numbers and I want to figure out how many, so if 18 stitches are over 3.5 inches, how many stitches do I need for 9.5 inches? And I don't have to guess. I can just set up a proportion. Woohoo! High school math, yay. So 18 stitches for 3.5 inches. How many inches do I want, or how many stitches do I want for 9.5 inches? And I can just cross multiply. So 18 times 9.5, 18 times 9.5, 3.5 times x, 3.5 times my unknown x. I just converted the half to 0.5. And if this math is going a little bit fast for you, there are plenty of videos. Lots of lovely math teachers on YouTube have like explained proportions and fractions to decimals and all of that. So I'm not going to go into how the math was done. All right, so then I multiply 18 times 9.5 and I get 171, which is equal to 3.5 times x. If I divide both sides by 3.5, these 3.5s cancel out. I'm left with x. So 3.5 divided by 3.5 is just 1. That leaves me with x. and I divide 171 divided by 3.5, and I get 48.857 is how many stitches I need to cast on. Right. You don't cast on a decimal. I can't cast on 0.857 stitches. It just isn't possible. So I am just going to cancel that out and look at it as 48. So 48 stitches is what I need. Great. Perfect. But is it going to work? And here's where another bit of finessing goes into it. Whatever stitch pattern you're using, how many stitches do you need to complete a pattern repeat? For me, it's 6. A stitch pattern is a multiple of 6, which makes this really simple because 48 stitches is a multiple of 6. Easy. What if I got something like 49 stitches or 47 stitches? Well, I just round to the nearest multiple of 6. Or if I had like 52, it becomes a matter of, okay, so because my stitch pattern was a little bit under 3.5 inches, it's okay, and it's a lace pattern, it's going to stretch, so I would probably round it down. But if things are a little bit tight, you might want to round it up depending upon your numbers. But for me, it's easy. 48 stitches is perfect. My pattern repeat's going to be 48 stitches, and that's what I'm going to need for my stitches. But I am not casting on for the stitches. I'm casting on for a ribbing to start out with. The ribbing is a multiple of 4. So at this point, I would take that 48 stitches and I would round it to the nearest multiple of 4. But guess what? 48 is also a multiple of 4, which means I can cast on 48 stitches and be good. A lot of times when I do the math comes out pretty close to what I need, and I don't have to round very often, but it's easy enough to do if necessary. And now we're ready to begin. I have taken a contrast yarn. This is a number 3 crochet cotton as well, and my crochet hook. And now I'm going to crochet a chain. This is a temporary cast on, and the reason for the temporary cast on will be clear a little bit later. So I start with a slip knot, put it on the crochet hook, and you'll notice this crochet hook is a little bit larger than my size 3 knitting needles, but at this point, this doesn't matter so much, and this will be helpful. So then I'm just going to loosely crochet at least 48 chains. And so that's just loop over the hook, pull it through, loop over the hook, pull it through. Very simple crochet. Well, it will be if the hook stays on the yarn. And it doesn't have to be tight. In fact, looser is better. And I'm not going to crochet 48 on camera. Let's skip ahead. I've done 52, 53, 54, good enough. Now I'm going to cut my yarn, pull it through, and then to make my life easier later, I'm going to put a knot on this side. The reason for that knot is going to become clear later on. And now I'm going to pick up and knit 48 stitches in this chain. I know you can do it with just 2 knitting needles, but I always find it's tricky to do it that way, so I always use a crochet hook. So I'm going to take my crochet chain and see the little V's on the front. This is the right side. I'm going to flip it over and look at the little bumps on the back. And I did this purposefully. I did more stitches than I was going to need, so I could start, I didn't have to start in that first stitch. So I'm going to take and not quite where, not the first stitch, but a couple stitches in, and in that bump, I'm going to pull up a loop. Then I'm going to go into the next bump. If you can see it. And pull up a loop. Now I'm going to take that off the crochet hook and I'm going to put it on the knitting needle, front to back. And then I'm going to continue on. So I'm going to look for that next loop, that next bump behind the V's of the chain stitch. And I'm going to pull up a loop. And then I'm going to put it on the hook. And I'm going to continue this until I have 48 stitches on the needle. And it's better to lie this down because it is easy for this to slide out. There's 5. And see, this does take a bit of time, but it will be worth it in the end. So I continue to do this until I have 48 stitches on the needle. Now that we've done the hard part, the casting on of the stitches, it is time to get into the project. We start with a 2x2 ribbing. And, well, the whole thing is in the round, but at this point we would have to divide this to 3 double-pointed needles and making sure not to twist stitches. And it's a lot of work when we can do the first row straight. It'll make things a little bit easier later on. So I'm just going to do knit 2, purl 2 all the way across. So let me get that started. So knit 2, purl 2. Being careful not to get my cast on row in it. So knit 2. And then we're going to get into purl 2. If I don't lose a stitch along the way. Easy to do sometimes. So this is straight up knit 2, purl 2. And I will meet you on the other side. And this stitch is twisted on the needle, so I'm just going to knit it through the back loop. Sometimes that happens when you're casting on. No big deal if it doesn't feel right, just do it through the back loop or reorient to the stitch on the needle. No big. And purl 1. And I again did that through the backwards, so I'll just purl that through the back loop. And that is the first row done. Now is time to divide this across 3 needles so that we're working in the round. And so I'll just take the second needle and I'm going to do I'll do 12 stitches. And then I'm going to do the second needle of 12. What I'm doing is I'm dividing them into kind of even, but multiples of 6, because my stitch pattern is going to be multiples of 6. So rather than breaking the pattern across needles, that way I can do each pattern repeat on one needle. Not critical, but it'll be helpful. So then I want to make sure that my needles are not twisted, and it's way easier to do that after knitting one row rather than trying to do it when I just have the cast on. So there we go. And I always get turned around at this point. I always have to go, okay, which way am I going? So here's my yarn. So I'm going to be knitting into this needle, which means I need to flip this over. And again, making sure I didn't twist anything, because this is where it's kind of important. After this, it's just straight knitting. So I'm going to go here. And now I'm going to start knitting in the round. And it's useful to have a table at this point. So I'm going to slide these stitches to the end. And all of that's tangled, of course, because of course. There we go. And double check that I didn't twist anything, because then I'll just have to rip it out and start over. Well, not all the way over, but you know, enough that if you don't have to rip it, don't. And so then I'm just going to continue on knitting in the knit stitches, purling in the purl stitches all the way around. So I'm going to go here, pull that through, and that first stitch kind of needs to be a little tight just to make sure that everything stays where it needs to. And knit and purl 2. And knit 2. And so this is just going to be the ribbing for a bit. Let me get to the end of this needle and then I'll explain a little bit more. All right. And the first round is going to be a little bit fiddly, but that's okay. Because the more stitches, the more rounds you get on the project, the easier it gets to work with. Okay, and knit 2. Drop the stitch, of course. There we go. Now, the most important thing at this point is to put a marker here, because I am very good at losing track of where I started. And yeah, I have this whole thing and I have the knot in the yarn, and yeah, I'm not going to see that. Big stitch marker sitting here, I'm going to see that. So you just continue on in the 2x2 ribbing until this is the width of the elastic. And so I will get to that point and pick this up then. I have knit about 4 rounds. 1, 2, 3. I can see about 4. And then I measured that against my elastic, and that is about the right size. So now I'm ready to do my turning round, which is just a round of purl. So instead of doing a 2x2 ribbing, I am going to purl an entire round. And so start a purl round all the way around. That first stitch should be a little bit tight, just so that ladders don't form. So just straight purling all the way around. And I've come to just about the end of the round, just purling all the way around. The next round is back to knit 2, purl 2, as if this purl row never happened. This is just our turning row. And it's going to fold over and make a casing for the elastic. So now I go back to the first needle, and which I know is the first needle by the marker, and I was starting with the knit 2, purl 2. So knit 2, purl 2 all the way around, and then make the same number of rounds that I made on this side. So it's going to fold over perfectly. So that was 4 rounds, and then a 5th round was like the cast on round. And rather than watch a 2x2 ribbing for another 5 rounds, I will catch up with you when we get to the end of this part. Of the casing. I've been knitting long enough for both sides of this purl ridge to be the width of the elastic, both about 4 rows, although that's going to depend on how long your elastic is. And so now it is time to make the elastic casing. So what comes next is to unravel this temporary cast on this crochet chain. So I can take this stitch marker out. And I'm going to look for my little knot that I put in that last time because that is where I'm going to start the unraveling from. That's why I put the knot there, because I can never find this again. So I'm going to start by undoing the knot here. So see the knot that started the crochet chain? And I'm just going to unknot it. And then start pulling. But before I get any farther on that, I'm going to grab another crochet knitting needle and start picking up the stitches as I go through them. This is a little tricky, especially with this first stitch, because this ends up just being like a yarn over. So I'm going to pick this up, and then I'm going to continue to unravel. So as this pulls out, I pick up the stitch that it took. So I've got this one, and then this kind of goes around. That first stitch is always just kind of a little off, especially if it's where I cast on. And then here is that first stitch. And then it's just a matter of being careful to catch the loops as I unravel them. So that's going to go through here and pull it out, because it is really, really easy to lose stitches here. Let me twist that. That's twisted backwards. So let me do that this way. And I will get things twisted at this point, which is fine. You can just sit down and get everything untwisted afterwards and then pull it out. So take your time with this. Because it's going to take a minute. Let's see, did that get twisted? And it doesn't matter too much right now because I can always fix that. But kind of see how the stitches are a little off center. That's because it's a cast on row as opposed to where you're usually knitting. So it's kind of like the half stitch between them, which is a little weird. But we will work with it because this is all going to get hidden later. Oops, got the wrong thing. So this knitting needle is the same size as the others. And I'm just going to match it to the needle before. So I'm going to do the same number of stitches on this one that I did on the previous, on the actual live side. This will make sense in a little bit. And I'm almost there. Ah. And that's about the end of that particular needle. And so I'm going to stop here and do the rest of this off camera because, as you can see, it is a little bit tricky and I just need to take my time with it. But the other thing you need to do at this point is to make sure those stitches are oriented correctly, kind of like front to back. And so this is also a stitch, but it just kind of went away just because of the way it's set up. So as I'm going to go through and just redo it and make sure this is oriented correctly. And as you can see, it's not. So that's just a matter of slipping as if to knit. That'll twist it. Or through the back of the loop. So it's front to back. Because in this case, trying to slip it as you go through is going to be awkward, and you'll see why in a little bit. So let me just slip that as if to knit. And that one too, except I'm going to go through the back loop on that one. Just to make sure they're all oriented the right way. making sure I didn't split any yarn, as happens sometimes. No, that's even more twisted. So I'm going through the back loop to kind of twist it around this way. And that one's okay. Whoops. And I just lost a stitch because, yeah, I did. At which point, if I can't grab it like this, I will just grab a crochet hook and grab that. Because, yeah, that's a goner. And I'm to the last few stitches. Just pulling them out carefully, loading them onto needles at the same time. And this last one, there we go. And I just pull the waste yarn out. And yeah, that is actually a stitch too, so I think that might be a stitch. Because at this point, then you just count everything to make sure that you have the same number of stitches that you started out with. And sometimes you are one off. So let me see. I've got, so let me count that. I dropped a stitch. See, it's right there. So I'm just going to retrieve it by, here's my stitch. And I'm just going to go through the front and pull it up. Oops, except that's twisted. Let me untwist it and pull it up through there. And then that's what that loop was. Pull it up through there. And there I go. Now's the time to measure your elastic. And rather than using a tape measure and trying to figure out exactly how, it's just easier to put the elastic around the bottle. Figure about how tight you're going to want it. And stretch it out a little bit because you want the elastic to stretch. So you're going to want this tight. And it doesn't have to be exact, but probably about there. And so if I put that around, tighten it up, that's about right. I've got the same number of stitches on this needle as this needle, the same number of stitches as these two, and as these two. That's going to make this next part easier because what we're going to do is we're going to fold it over. And this is kind of awkward, so I'm going to start with my first needle. So my first needle I can tell because that's where the yarn is. And everything's tangled. Let me get untangled. So I look for where the yarn is, and this is where I left off, and I'll be knitting into this needle first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over, and with the double pointeds and everything, it can be a little awkward, so take your time and you fold it over so that these meet together like this. And it's going to take me a minute to orient this mess. And once I've done a lot of rearranging and slipping of needles through, everything meets up like this. So it kind of looks like a band. And so once I find where the end is, so this was the last needle, because that's where the yarn is. See? And I'm going to be knitting into these 2 needles. And what I'm basically going to do is a 3 needle bind off without the bind off. So the first stitch, now this fell off, and so I'm going to treat it like a first stitch. So I'm going to do a yarn over there kind of, and then I'm going to knit these 2 together. And I'm just going to knit. I'm not going to worry about doing the ribbing here because that's just too much to deal with everything you've already seen. And before we get started, there's one more thing I need to do, and that is insert the elastic. So I'm going to insert the elastic. And knit around it. Okay, that was a lot to get situated, but now that it's situated, it gets really easy. So I'm going to take this, making sure that that is between those 2, and remembering that that first stitch is just kind of that yarn over. And I'm going to take this needle, and I'm going to go through the first stitch, and then the stitch behind, which is that yarn over. I'm just kind of holding it there. And then I'm going to take the yarn, the working yarn, and I'm going to knit through both stitches. So through this one and off the needle, boom, and through this one and off the needle. Okay, that first one is really, really awkward. So the second one is going to go way easier. So elastic is flat through the 2. I'm going to go through the first stitch and then the back stitch, and then I'm going to knit them both off the needle. 1, 2, and both of those stitches come off the needle, and they're now on this. Let me do that again. Through the front, through the back, round, through the front and off, through the, keep going, and off, through there and off. And so then I've basically knit these 2 stitches together from the front and the back onto here. Again. Through the front stitch, through the back stitch, through the front of the back and off, through the front and off. And see how both of those stitches are worked with the one. This back one is more of a, is not metal, so it's a little bit easier for the front one to slip, but those are the stitches I had. Oops, better not lose a stitch. And I'm going to do it again. Let me find my yarn. Go through the front, go through the back, knit that first stitch. And really it can be a smooth movement. You don't need to think about it too much. You're going through both of those stitches together and then off of both of the needles together. Try that again. Both of them, and then I'm just knitting them both off at the same time. Through and off. Through, around, and off. And wow, that I've gotten to the end of that needle, you can see the elastic is encased in it, and it is all stitched together with that purl ridge at the top. I'm going to do the same for these next two. So this is all kind of situated correctly. The elastic goes through, sandwiched in between the two layers. Bring the needle over, tighten this, and again, just straight knitting, kind of. Needle through the front, needle through the back, knit them together, and off both needles. Through the front, through the back, and off the needles. Now I've only got a few stitches left. And then at the end, this is all going to be closed up. But I have a problem here, right? My elastic isn't put together. So this is the point in which I sew that up. I perhaps could have sewn it together earlier, but it makes it way more awkward, especially since everything is awkward at that point, to sew it up then. So it's easier to just do it now. So I'll kind of fold this over. There was a bit of an overlap there. Now I'm not a terribly good sewer, but regular needle, thread, double it up, knot on the end, which has now become tangled, of course. There we go. Knot on the end, overlap these two a bit. And then I don't have to be a great sewer here because this is all going to get covered up by my knitting. And so I'm just going to go through both layers. So I'm just going to kind of put those together. And then this doesn't have to be neat. It just has to be put together. And so I'm just going to whip stitch around. And a thimble would be helpful. But just around and around and around until it's secured. And of course, stretch it as you go work to make sure that the thread isn't making it not stretchable. But just around and around and around. And as you can see, my stitches are absolutely terrible. But the important thing is that going to hold? So I'm going to go around again and just make sure that I have these stitched together and just to make sure that nothing's going to come apart. And at this point, I am just about out of thread. I pull that to make sure it pulls. Not very attractive, but it'll do the job. And then I just want to knot it and tie it off. So kind of through the loop a few times. Make sure I'm going the right way. Because I've unknotted when I'm supposed to be knotting before, and yeah. Okay. I'm sure there's a much better way to do this, but this is just going to get the job done. And now I can't get the needle through, so it's time to cut that. Take out the scissors, cut it. And that part's done. Right now I'm just going to lay that down and we're going to continue on with the knitting. Everything got tangled, of course. And we're just going to continue on this end of so back to this part. And this band should actually stretch through. So at this point, this should kind of lay flat. So you want to kind of pull it back through. Make sure all the needles are where you're not going to lose any stitches, and then just kind of stretch it so it comes back through there. Kind of mess with it until it is going to be just level with it. See how it's going to kind of just all disappear? Make sure it is situated so that it's going to do that. And so I'll pull it through on this side as well. Fiddle with it a little bit now. And it's just, it will kind of work its way in there as you finish up. So let me finish up. Uh-oh, that one's on backwards. But that's fixable. Whoops. Kind of. All right, did I go through? Yeah, that's good. Or not. Let's try that again. And again. You'd think I'd check these stitches, but apparently I didn't. And last stitch. Yay. I promise it gets way easier after this. This is the hard part. And the hard part's at the beginning, so that when you're ready to finish, it finishes really easy. And there you go. And that is the elastic band. And see how that's sticking out a little bit? That's just gonna kind of stick that in there. And kind of mess with it a little bit to get it situated. So that's kind of the double layer kind of gets in there. But it's going to be swallowed up, especially at this point where you kind of just can stretch it. And it's going to stretch. And you've got that elastic in there. So it'll keep it from writing down later. So just kind of stretch it. and then it kind of works its way into there. And now we've got the top elastic casing part done. At this point, it's back to 3 double pointed needles and circular working. So you just kind of start here, and I'm going to place my marker here to remind myself that this is the beginning. And start working your stitch pattern. If you had to do different numbers of stitches because your 2x2 ribbing doesn't match the stitch number you need for your pattern, this next row would be the row that you either increase or decrease to make that adjustment. And you can just do a straight row of knitting here to do that, or you can start immediately with your pattern and increase or decrease to get those stitches to the right stitch pattern. I am going to jump ahead. I'm going to work the stitch pattern for a little while, starting here, and so you can see kind of how it develops. But this is where you would go from the ribbing to whatever stitch pattern you're doing for the rest of the project. Now I've worked a little bit ahead and done a couple repeats of the pattern stitch. Now is a really good time to also measure and make sure everything is working and that I have enough stitches. It is big enough to go over the water bottle, and yes, it is going to fit just fine. So now I've skipped ahead. I've done a couple of repeats of my pattern stitch. The pattern stitch I'm using is the English Mesh Lace, which you can find online. Just search it out, English Mesh Lace knitting stitch, and it'll pop up. I found this one in a stitch dictionary, Barbara Walker's to be specific, but it's around. But you don't have to use this particular stitch pattern. You can use whatever strikes your fancy, which is why you would have already done a swatch, figured out how many stitches you need, and already figured out this part. Now, at any point that you want, this is the tail that we started when we cast on. You can wind those ends in. You can kind of shove them underneath the elastic band or wind them in any way you want, but go ahead and wind that in as soon as you can. I've let it just hang for a little while, but I will be winding that in shortly. So I have the marker here to remind me which needle is my first needle, so I know that I'm ready to go. And I'm just reading off the stitch pattern. So the first stitch is just a knit. So I knit one. Then I have a yarn over. And I always think of it as a yarn under because you come under and then over the needle. And then the next stitch is a slip, slip, knit, which is just you slip the stitch as if to knit, slip the stitch as if to knit, put the needle through the front, and then knit through the back. Then knit one and a knit two together, where I take 2 stitches and I pull them together as if to knit. Just knit them together and yarn over, and then repeat. Knit one, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. So slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, through the back, and knit. Knit one, then take 2 stitches and knit them together, and yarn over. The stitch pattern was written flat, and so all the right sides are worked knit and with the pattern, and then the wrong sides are purling back. But we are working in the round, so instead of purling back, I am knitting all the way around. So all of my stitch rows between, so I did a pattern row and then I do a straight knit row, or round. These are rounds. And you just knit into everything, especially the yarn overs. So it's like you have one row where you have to pay attention, one round where you have to pay attention, and then one round where you can just kind of take a mental break. So then after the round of straight knit, I again have a pattern stitch round. And so this is called round 4. I knit 1. Then yarn over, then knit 1. And then I do a thing called a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over. So it's a double decrease that's kind of centered. So I start by slipping 1 as if to knit, then I knit 2 together. If I can get my needle through both of those stitches, knit 2 together. And then I take this stitch that I just slipped, and I pass it over that, knit 1, yarn over. Again, repeat. Knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and then my double decrease. Slip 1 as if to knit, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over, and that's my double decrease. Knit 1 and yarn over. So you will continue knitting in the stitch pattern, whatever stitch pattern you want, until this is as long as your water bottle. So here's my water bottle, and the elastic kind of goes about here. So I want to knit this until it is down to about here-ish, kind of towards the bottom. And I will pick this up again when it is time to start decreasing for the bottom of the water bottle. So I've continued on with the pattern until it's to a length that is about where I'm going to want it. And the best way to test that out is to measure it. So here's my water bottle, and I'm going to put the water bottle in the sleeve. And yes, I am stretching this out, but you do actually want this to be on there tight. Otherwise, it falls down, and this shows off the lace pattern so much more nicely than it would if I like knit a bunch more rows just to make it so it should stretch out like that. And yeah, we're at the point where I'm ready to start the bottom. So now that I know it's long enough, I get to start on the bottom. And the first thing I'm going to do is knit a round, just even knit, just to get everything kind of evened out to start off with. And you know how to do this part. And I'll see you around on the other side. I have now completed one round of just straight knitting, just a straight knit stitch all the way around. And then at the same time, I also evened out the stitches on the needle, so I have 16 stitches on each needle. So now I'm ready to start the decreases. I like to decrease in multiples of 8, which made all this easy. I had 48 stitches. I have a multiple of 8, and I can do that easily. If you do not have an even multiple of something like 8, you can go by 9s or 10s or 7s or 6s. But if you don't have an even multiple of something like that, that round where I just did a straight knit, you can fix it and decrease a couple stitches just to make it an even multiple of something. All right, so I'm going to decrease by 8s just because that makes it easier. So I'm going to start with, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit 6 and then knit 2 together. And what decrease you use is not really critical. So I'm going with the easy one, knit 2 together. So I'm going to do 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, oops, 5, 6, knit 2 together, and then another 6 and knit 2 together. And that's why I evened up the stitches. It just makes it really easy to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. See, really simple. And then the same for the next 2 needles. Right, so I have finished the round of the decreases, and so instead of 48 stitches, I now have 42. And then I do an even round where I just knit everything, no decreases this round. It's just to make sure we have enough of a base. So just a straight knit all the way around. And you can start to see a bottom forming. So that was an even round. Then the next round is a decrease round, and it's decrease round, decrease round, even round until we get almost to the end. So that was, the last one was 8. So now I'm decreasing by 7. So that means I'm going to knit 5, knit 2 together. If you want to hide the decreases, you would just have to make sure you do a decrease at a different spot each time you do the decrease round. I'm doing it so that they stack and it's going to form a swirl, which will be really cool when we get there. But right now you can't see it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then knit 2 together. And again, 1, 2, whoops, 2, 3, 4, 5, knit 2 together, maybe. Sometimes these get a little tight. Okay, there we go. Knit 2 together. Switch needles, and again, 5, knit 2 together, 5, knit 2 together. And I have now completed another round. So that was a decrease round, then it's another straight round, decrease round, straight round, decrease round. And I'm going to pick this up when I have decreased a bunch more. So this is 6. So this, it'll be an even round, and then it'll be 4, knit 2 together, then it'll be 3, knit 2 together, 2, knit 2 together, and I'll meet you when this is a lot more closed up. And so I have worked it so that I am down to 6 stitches per needle, and you can see that it's closed up quite a lot. What's great about this part of the project is every other round is decreased by 8, so every other round it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. It also gets a little more awkward, so it is a good idea to do this on a table. So we are down to 6 stitches per needle, which means I'm doing 3 stitches per decrease. So that's knit 1, knit 2 together. And you can see why a table is helpful at this point. Knit 1, knit 2 together. Ah. Knit 1, knit 2 together. And yes, this is fiddly, and that's okay. Take your time with it, because we're almost done. And there is no need to rush. So flip to the second needle. And where'd the yarn go? There it is. This is always so awkward. Okay, knit one. Knit two together. Probably shouldn't be doing this part on camera. Knit one. Knit two together. And final needle. Knit one. Maybe. There we go. Knit one. Knit two together. And if you have a decrease that works easier than the knit two together at this point, go for it. Knit two together. And it's as easy and difficult as that. Now I've got 12 stitches left. 12 stitches left. Helps if that's on camera. All right. So then another round of, well, I can do another round of even. Now we are at 12 stitches total. And notice how everything kind of gets really awkward at this point. And it's like really, really close. So sometimes you can kind of fudge it at this point. At this point, it's like the last couple of rounds. You really don't need that round of even. And I'm there. Make sure that the needles don't get turned around, because it is really easy to flip it around and then be knitting on the wrong side. And then you have this weird twist in there. So make sure you're knitting straight on the knit side. See the knit side? And so then this is just all knit two together all the way around. And yeah, this is way, way awkward. Knit two together. Knit two together. Ah. Flip it around. Knit two together, knit two together. Did I just lose a stitch? I just lost a stitch. Happens. Knit two together. Maybe. There we go. Knit two together. Ah. All right. Ha. Knit two together. Okay, that took me a minute to get situated. Like I said, take your time with this. It is just awkward. Okay. And see how I'm twisted? Yep. Now I'm not twisted. All right, great. And then my final knit two together, knit two together. And you do have the option of doing one final round of knit 2 togethers. But as you can see, I don't want to risk it because I'm already making a mess and I really don't want to mess with it anymore. So I'm calling that done. If I can get that knit 2, there we go. All done. Yay. Done. What? There's no bind off. Yeah, there's no bind off. So I could do another round of knit 2 togethers, but yeah, that last round was way awkward and I'm done. I'm done. That's it. And 6 is really fine to end this with. So we're done. Yeah, no, we have one more step. So I'm going to cut, and it really doesn't need to be this long. So I just cut, and I had to cut the video because it took me a minute to find my tapestry needle. It was kind of buried. So get out your tapestry needle, wherever that happens to be, and thread it. And then here's where I ended up. And so then I'm going to start back at the beginning. So see where the yarn is. See where the yarn is. And then I'm going to go back through the first 2. Take the needle away. Pull it through. Then the next 2. Through the stitches. Through the stitches. This is why this doesn't need to be that long. And then, whoops, almost lost those again. And then through those 2, and we are done. And you just tighten it. Boom. And that leaves it with, and see those little swirls? That's because all the knit 2 togethers were in the same spot. If you want to hide that, you can, but I kind of like the way that swirls. So then you can go through a second time. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Kind of depends on the mood. Just kind of go through again, just to kind of tighten it up. Then poke that through to the other side and wind in your end. And I would definitely cut this. I would only wind in about this much and then cut the rest of it because there really is no need to keep it up like that. And that's the project. And once you have wound in that final end, the project is complete. Find your water bottle, slip the sleeve on, and you are done.